The road stretched out before me like an endless ribbon, illuminated only by the eerie glow of my truck's headlights. As a seasoned truck driver, I was accustomed to the solitude of the open highway, but this night felt different, charged with an inexplicable tension. The radio buzzed with static, the only companion to my thoughts as I navigated the dark, desolate roads. It was well past midnight when I saw him, a lone figure standing by the side of the road, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. The night was cold, and the man looked weary, his clothes tattered and soaked from the drizzling rain. "You headed west?" he asked, his voice raspy and low. I nodded, unlocking the passenger door. "Hop in. It's a long stretch of road ahead." As he settled into the seat, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. His eyes, though shadowed, seemed to gleam with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. He mumbled a thanks, and we continued our journey in silence. Minutes turned into hours, and the road seemed to stretch into eternity. The stranger remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside. I tried to engage him in conversation, but his responses were curt, his attention never wavering from the road ahead. As we drove deeper into the night, an inexplicable sense of dread settled over me. I stole glances at the stranger, his face gaunt and pale under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. His hands, gripping the edge of the seat, seemed unusually long, the fingers bony and elongated. "Where are you headed?" I asked, my voice quivering despite my attempts to sound casual. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Does it matter? We all have our destinations, don't we?" I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. I could feel his eyes on me, the weight of his gaze like a physical presence. The radio crackled to life, a voice announcing a severe storm warning in the area. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof of the truck in a menacing rhythm. I decided to pull over at a deserted rest area, hoping the break would ease the growing tension. But as I parked the truck, the stranger's demeanor changed. His breathing became labored, and he seemed agitated, as if the stillness of the night was suffocating him. "Let me out," he demanded, his voice a low growl. I hesitated but complied, unlocking the door. As soon as he stepped out, he vanished into the darkness, his figure swallowed by the night. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I resumed my journey, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Glancing in my side mirror, my blood ran cold. The stranger stood at the edge of the road, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, heart pounding in my chest. The truck roared to life, hurtling down the highway at breakneck speed. The rain lashed against the windshield, distorting my view of the road ahead. In my rearview mirror, I glimpsed the stranger, his figure blurring in the rain, but his eyes, his gleaming, malevolent eyes, remained fixed on me. I drove for what felt like an eternity, the nightmarish encounter etched into my mind. Eventually, the first light of dawn broke on the horizon, and the rain subsided. The sense of dread that had gripped me began to fade, replaced by the pale light of morning. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time, I caught a final glimpse of the stranger. He stood at the edge of the road, his form fading into the distance, but his eyes, those haunting eyes, remained imprinted in my memory. I continued my journey, haunted by the inexplicable encounter. The memory of the hitchhiker, with his unearthly eyes and unsettling presence, would forever linger in the corners of my mind, a chilling reminder that some encounters on the road are far from ordinary. The night was as dark as tar, swallowing the road ahead of me. My tired eyes strained against the blackness, searching for any signs of life. Rain battered my windshield, and the wind howled like a mournful ghost. Just when despair was about to set in, a flickering light emerged through the mist. A diner, dimly lit and forlorn, stood as a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. I pulled into the parking lot, raindrops pelting the roof of my car like tiny drum beats. The neon sign flickered like a dying ember, casting eerie shadows on the wet pavement. Hesitation clawed at me, but I pushed it aside, desperate for a break from the desolation of the road. Stepping inside, The door creaked as if protesting my intrusion. The diner was empty, save for a waitress behind the counter. Her eyes, hollow and distant, met mine briefly before she gestured towards a corner booth. The air was heavy, thick with an unspoken fear that settled into my bones. I ordered a cup of coffee, hoping its warmth would chase away the chill that clung to me. Minutes passed like hours in the silence, broken only by the sound of rain against the window pane. Just as I considered leaving, the door creaked open again, and a stranger stumbled in, soaked to the bone and wide-eyed with terror. "I need your help," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rain. I nodded, my curiosity piqued despite the fear that gnawed at my insides. He spoke of whispers in the wind, voices that seemed to emerge from the heart of the forest, driving him to flee until he found this diner. His words hung in the air, laden with an unshakable dread. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the atmosphere grew even colder. The waitress stared out of the window, her eyes widening with fear. Shadows moved in the darkness beyond the glass, distorted figures that seemed to dance with malevolence. "We need to leave now," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I followed her lead, my heart pounding in my chest. We ran back to our cars, rain soaking us to the bone. As I sped away, the voices grew louder, morphing into guttural growls that seemed to chase us down the highway. Glancing in my rearview mirror, I half expected to see a horde of malevolent eyes glaring back at me. But there was nothing, only the rain-soaked highway disappearing into the night. The encounter haunted my dreams for years, a reminder of the night I narrowly escaped the clutches of something I could not comprehend. And whenever I drive past a deserted diner on a lonely highway, I shudder, knowing that some secrets are best left undisturbed in the shadows of the night. The night was pitch black, the kind that swallows stars whole and leaves nothing but an impenetrable darkness. In the cozy cocoon of our RV, my wife, Sarah, and I drove down the winding road, the headlights cutting through the obsidian night like two feeble candles in a vast, lightless void. The only sounds were the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic pattering of rain against the roof. With each mile that slipped away behind us, a palpable unease settled inside the RV. The dense forest on either side of the road seemed to press in on us, creating an atmosphere thick with mystery and foreboding. Sarah glanced at me, her eyes reflecting the same unease I felt. "It feels like we're being watched," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. I nodded, my grip on the steering wheel tightening involuntarily. We both tried to dismiss our unease as mere imagination, but the feeling persisted, gnawing at the edges of our consciousness like a persistent nightmare. That's when we saw him, a figure standing on the roadside, his silhouette barely visible in the dim glow of our headlights. Sarah gasped, her hand instinctively reaching for mine. The stranger appeared out of nowhere, his presence in the desolate wilderness inexplicable and eerie. "What should we do?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with anxiety. My instincts told me to keep driving, to leave the stranger behind in the darkness. But a sense of empathy tugged at my heart. What if he needed help? Reluctantly, I pulled over, and we opened the door to the night. The stranger approached, his footsteps silent against the rain-soaked ground. His clothes clung to his gaunt frame, and his eyes, hollow and haunted, met ours with a mixture of desperation and gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice quivering. "I've been lost out here for hours. Can you give me a ride to the nearest town?" Compassion flooded my heart, and I nodded. "Of course, hop in." He climbed into the RV, his presence casting a chilling aura over our cozy space. As we resumed our journey, he fell into an uneasy silence. The rain beat against the windows like ghostly fingertips, and the RV seemed to echo with the hollowness of the night. Minutes turned into hours, and the stranger's presence grew increasingly unsettling. He stared out of the window, his eyes fixed on something only he could see. Sarah tried to engage him in conversation, but his responses were vague, as if he was lost in a world far removed from ours. A sense of dread settled over us, suffocating the air inside the RV. It was then that the stranger spoke, his voice a mere whisper in the shadows. "Do you believe in ghosts?" he asked, his gaze still fixed on the invisible specter outside. The question hung in the air like a malevolent spirit. Sarah and I exchanged uneasy glances, our fear mirrored in each other's eyes. "I've seen them, you know," he continued, his voice laced with madness. "They walk among us, invisible to most, but I can see them. They whisper in the wind, and their footsteps echo in the silence of the night." My heart pounded in my chest, each word he uttered sending chills down my spine. The RV seemed to tremble with his revelations, the walls closing in on us like the bars of a spectral prison. "Stop the RV," he suddenly commanded, his voice low and commanding. I hesitated for a moment before complying, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The RV came to a halt, and the stranger stepped out, his eyes alight with an otherworldly fire. "They're here," he whispered, his voice a mere echo in the night. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving us paralyzed with fear. Sarah and I clung to each other, our hearts pounding in our chests as the minutes stretched into eternity. Suddenly, a soft whisper filled the air, a chorus of ethereal voices carried by the wind. The RV seemed to vibrate with their presence, and we heard our names, whispered like a mournful lament. "Sarah. James." The voices grew louder, their desperation palpable. We covered our ears, trying to block out the spectral symphony that surrounded us. And then, as suddenly as it began, the voices faded away, leaving us in a stunned silence. We dared not move, afraid of what we might see if we ventured outside. Hours passed before we found the courage to start the RV again. We drove in silence, haunted by the eerie encounter with the stranger and the ghostly voices that had surrounded us. When the first light of dawn broke on the horizon, we breathed a sigh of relief. The darkness that had gripped us all night seemed to retreat with the rising sun, leaving us with a chilling tale to recount, a tale of the night we had come face to face with the unknown, and survived to tell the tale. As we drove away from that desolate stretch of road, we vowed never to speak of that night again, burying the memory deep within the recesses of our minds. But the encounter with the midnight wanderer and the ghostly voices would forever linger in the corners of our consciousness, a reminder that the supernatural world is closer than we think, lurking just beyond the veil of our reality, waiting to reveal itself in the most unexpected of moments.